I think we're in a pretty good spot. So I'll kind of leave you to get started and give me just like 15 seconds to hide myself and start it live.
Well, hi everyone. I truly wish that we were all gathered in a big hall somewhere celebrating one another's company, and I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to do that next year. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a couple shout outs. First to our friends at Flylords. They're our partner in Trout Week this week. They're a terrific media company. If you don't see their social offerings, it's well worth checking them out on Instagram. They've been helping to promote all of the activities associated with Trout Week. And I know that Jeff is going to tout that before we hang up, so I won't steal his thunder. And then the other thing I wanted to do is just celebrate the University of Georgia Five Rivers College Club. Our Chattahoochee chapter in Atlanta started this really cool initiative called Clean My Water. I don't know if you can see that there. I happen to have one of their mugs. And the idea is really simple. When you go fishing, pick up a net's worth of trash. And then this is being run this week by as I mentioned, the University of Georgia Five Rivers Club. But if you pick up a net of trash and then take a picture of that and post it on Instagram with hashtag Clean My Water, you can potentially win a number of really cool prizes. And if you want to learn, I mean, this is such an obvious thing. I've been fishing with a bag in my either the back of my vest or in my fanny pack forever and ever. And this is a great way to really try to give a little bit back to these rivers and streams that we care so much about. So just go to the Five Rivers Club created a website at www.cleanmywater.org. There's a pretty funny little video there, sort of with the anthem is just clean the dang stuff up. And I'd encourage you to just go check that out and see what you think. Picking up a little bit of trash isn't a bad idea, and winning some swag wouldn't be a bad thing either. Welcome to Trout Week. This is our virtual, the equivalent of an annual meeting. It will culminate, in fact, with an annual meeting, which will be very different from when we're typically all gather. But what a strange 18 months this has been for all of us. We're living through a global pandemic. We had a reckoning with racial injustice as a nation. Internally, we came to the realization that we need to do a better job as an organization of being more inclusive and trying to look more like America, trying to be more diverse. And we came to truly appreciate those essentials out there, the essential workers who clean up our streets, who keep us safe, who stock our shelves, and very early in the pandemic put themselves in harm's way when we really knew very little about this virus. And one of the things we did early on here at Trout Unlimited was we decided that we wanted to give away free memberships to essential workers. And it was in an otherwise dark time, it was wonderful to interact with so many of these folks. And I want to share an exchange that I had with one of these essential workers. My screen is not clicking over. There we go. So this is Scott, and he wrote me a note. I'm gonna read what he said to me. He said, "Do I qualify for the free membership? I am a special education teacher at a school for individuals diagnosed with autism. We are doing our very best to implement distance learning for our students and provide daily support for their parents who desperately need assistance. I'm very proud of being an integral part of leading this process and feel very fortunate to be there for the students and the families I love very much." And so the very next day, I wrote back and I said, "Of course you qualify." The very next day, Scott wrote back to me and he said, "I would like to retract the request to determine if I am an essential worker. That was selfish on my end, and many other people out there fit that criteria far more appropriately. Thank you once again for what TU is doing. Well, of course, we gave Scott a free membership. And if there is anything, in fact, Scott may have paid for it now that I think about it, but if there is anything more essential than those who work with special needs kids, I'm not sure I know what it is. But I tell you this story because Scott is one of these folks that is so typical across this organization. I'm going to share with you some amazing stories and amazing accomplishments. And because I'm going to try to keep this fairly brief, I'm not going to go into detail about all the people, but know that for everything I talk to you about today, there's probably 6 or 7 Scotts behind the scene, or Sallys, or Jims, or Janes, who are helping. They're giving selflessly of themselves, and it's both staff and volunteers. And they're people who just give so much back to this organization and so much back to these rivers and streams that give us so much joy and ask for so little in return. So this is our new mission statement. Many of you, I know, were involved in some of our sessions over the summer. Truly think that this is the tightest strategic plan that we've ever developed. And I think it's as good as it is because of all of your engagement. I hope that you can see yourself in this plan because I think it's truly the best reflection of the organization I have ever seen in my time at TU. The thing about Trout Unlimited is we are quite literally a tapestry. And we bring together and we work with anyone and everyone who is willing to help us and our cause. I like to think of us as being equal opportunity conservationists at TU. If you care about conservation, we want to work with you. And I hope that this new mission statement is an accurate reflection of that for you. I'm obliged to share this with you. We had a terrific year from a revenue perspective. It continues 10 good years of growth. We've been averaging about 14% annual growth per year, which is terrific. And there's 2 reasons for that. And there's 2 reasons it matters. Number one, money flows to things that people want. And people like what we do. They like the idea that we are making tangible differences in the communities that we live and love and serve. The other thing that I want to point out, though, is that this allows us to put more people on the ground where these key watersheds are, where these communities are, where we do so much good. That's why it's important to keep growing the pie, if you will. It's not just about gathering money for the sake of money. It's about putting more conservation on the ground. And an absolutely vital part of that are our volunteers. I'll let you look at this. And I want you to remember that these numbers, these are during a pandemic when most of us were in quarantine. If you simply monetized the volunteer hours, you'd be looking at like $10 million in contributions by our volunteers. Our volunteers are truly the heart and soul of this organization. And the fact that they were able to contribute $10 million worth of conservation in a pandemic is absolutely amazing. So you should all take a bow for that amazing contribution. This is just a quick schematic that shows our whole protect, reconnect, restore, sustain frame and some selected accomplishments on the left side. We were able to protect almost 7 million acres of land this year, which is a remarkable achievement in and of itself. In any year, it would be a remarkable achievement. One of the areas that's included in here that I won't cover in the talk, but I think it bears mentioning up front is part of these miles protected include streams, rivers and streams in Washington state, where we were effective in getting a prohibition on something called suction dredge mining in rivers that have listed species, meaning species that are protected under the Endangered Species Act, such as salmon and steelhead and trout. Major accomplishment. And we were also able to engage in reconnect activities and restoration on over 1,400 miles of river. And I'll talk about a very selected few of these accomplishments coming up. But this is one of the challenges of giving this talk every year, is that there is so much that gets left on the cutting room floor. I'm going to try to high grade out in a geographically based or diverse way, I think, some of the best projects. But please know this is a tiny snapshot of the accomplishments of the organization over time, over this year. So, we're one of, there's a lot of conservation groups that do policy and advocacy work. And then there's a lot of other conservation groups that do on the ground habitat restoration. TU is really one of the only groups that does both. And what we try to do is we try to leverage the goodwill that we create in hundreds of communities around the country through our watershed restoration work, through our work with kids, through our work with veterans. We try to leverage that to help on the policy and the advocacy side. We quite literally try to put a human face to these sometimes arcane issues that we work on, like cleaning up abandoned mines or Western water law. But the biggest policy achievement of the past year has to be we stopped the Pebble mine. I am so happy that I am able to say that finally after 15 years. And it is, as you all know, the Trump administration denied a very important permit for the Pebble project in the waning days of their administration. And then more recently, the EPA, basically in response to litigation that we filed, and we're not litigious as an organization, but we did litigate, and the Ninth Circuit basically found that they agreed with our argument. And so in response to that litigation, the EPA is reinitiating the process that should lead to the protection under the Clean Water Act of Bristol Bay. It's a truly remarkable achievement, and one that simply could not have been possible, first and foremost, without the support of those Alaska Native villages, those local communities. Second, the lodges out there in Bristol Bay were terrific. I've never seen the outdoor retail industry and all of the hook and bullet community gather around, galvanize around an issue like they did on this. The commercial fishing industry and recreational anglers were in lockstep, and that does not happen very often, folks. But it's a terrific and a tremendous win. And of course, we have work to do to secure the long-term protection for that area. But we're off to a really terrific start. And you should all be proud of the not insignificant contributions that you all played in helping to make that a reality. So thank you. I want to read for you, just about an hour or two ago, one of our organizers up there in Bristol Bay sent me a note. I just want to read something she sent to me. She said, Bristol Bay, this is Megan Barker, by the way. She says, Bristol Bay represents the power that we have when we come together for fish and communities that are defined by fish. Major wins happen when we put our differences aside, let science and law guide our advocacy, and never give up, even when things look bleak. Thank you to our national network of Bristol Bay advocates who have come out year after year and who are sticking with us as we advance permanent protections for the region. That's really well said, Megan. Thank you for that. And thank all of you for the immense contributions you made over a 15-year period in helping us to get to where we are today. Over in a little further to the southeast is the Tongass National Forest. It's America's largest national forest. It also happens to harbor 25% of the world's temperate rainforests. But what makes the Tongass really unique is that it is an absolute fish factory. 50 million fish are reared in the rivers and streams that traverse the Tongass. And somewhat counterintuitively, it was also the last forest in our national forest system that still allowed for large-scale clear cuts and industrial logging, essentially, of old growth. And I'm very pleased to say that the Forest Service, I think, came to a very good decision. And they basically said, we want to stop that practice. We want to manage this for the fish factory that it is. Oh, and we're also going to reinstate the protections for these wilderness quality roadless areas, which are basically the nurseries that keep the Tongass so important from a salmon perspective. So a couple of major wins in Alaska, thanks to all of you and all of your great advocacy. And 1 out of 4 jobs in Southeast Alaska come from either recreation or from fishing. And so the people of Southeast Alaska are really pleased, and they should be, with this outcome. The pandemic made people flock to rivers and streams like nothing probably since a river runs through it, and maybe even more so. But the good news is that the Congress passed a law called the Great American Outdoors Act, which is going to make protecting some of these rivers and streams a lot easier. What they did was they authorized in perpetuity $900 million to be spent annually on a program called the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This is a hugely important, if unheralded, conservation legislation. It's been in effect in every county in America. And so it's not always protecting big, wide open spaces. It's also creating parks in urban areas or playgrounds for kids. But it's a tremendously important, chronically underfunded piece of legislation. Congress never appropriated the full 900 million that it was due. But now they've basically tied their hands and said it's authorized. So every year we're going to have $900 million to protect places like Coldstream. This is in Maine. This is one of Maine's finest brook trout fisheries that was acquired through the Land and Water Conservation Fund and then eased and conserved. And so we hope to see a lot more of that around the country. The Congress also appropriated billions of dollars that we can use to begin to get ahead of the maintenance backlog on our national forests. So terrific news and terrific advocacy from every corner of TU to help make this bill a reality. Now, you may recall that the EPA had removed the protections of the Clean Water Act for so-called ephemeral streams. These are seasonal streams that typically flow or run only in response to weather events like rain or snow or sleet. And remarkably, what the government said was, we don't know what the effects of this new regulation are going to be because there's no database to measure how many ephemeral streams are out there. Our science team cried foul on that. And they actually went out and they did the work that the federal government should have done. And they found that in states like Colorado, which you see here, up to half of all the stream miles in the state that had historically enjoyed the protections of the Clean Water Act would have lost them. And happily, they were able to publish the findings of their work in a peer-reviewed journal. And that work is now helping to drive the new administration, the new EPA, in a different direction, where we hope the process that they've initiated will result in the protection, again, of these small, intermittent, and ephemeral streams. So another major achievement in Congress was that they ratified a water rights settlement between the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes in the state of Montana. This is the largest settlement of its kind, $1.9 billion. And it only happened, well, I shouldn't say it only happened, but one of the reasons that it happened was because of the terrific decades-long partnership that TU has had with these tribes in that area. And the reason this matters to us is that there will be millions of dollars that will be designated toward the Flathead Indian Irrigation Project, which should result in significant improvements for West Slope cutthroat trout and bull trout. Congress also created new legislation that provides funding for major aquatic restoration, including dam removal. And our hope is that this is the kind of funding that we might be able to access for places like the Eel River, where we have a very exciting opportunity to take out a dam and open up 300 miles of habitat for salmon and steelhead in an incredibly productive river system. This spring, a mundane thing happened that was then followed by an absolutely remarkable thing. The mundane thing was that a developer proposed to build a major development in 775 acres of the headwaters of a place called Red Brook. It would have involved a dog track. It would have had a casino, hotels, just typical, dime a dozen development. The problem is that we have worked with the state of Massachusetts and multiple other partners for years and years to protect Red Brook. And it's really unique form of brook trout. They're called salter brook trout. And these fish, what they do is they rear in the freshwater and then they move down to the estuary in the brackish water where they can grow 4 to 5 inches in a year. And the TU volunteers just took to the street. We've spent $4 million working on Red Brook over the years. We've seen the fish populations double, triple, quadruple. They've really responded. But this development could have compromised all of that. And as you would predict, 4 of the 5 town selectmen, they supported the development. The mayor supported the development. And then the Trout Unlimited chapters got involved and they decamped on the town of Wareham, which is where this is located. And Wareham had to vote to approve to allow this development to occur. And I'll tell you, there's something a little bit frightening about seeing aging hippies standing on the corner of streets in Wareham holding signs that say, honk if you want to vote no on Notice, which was the name of the development. But by gosh, they showed up, and it worked. It worked. The remarkable thing that happened was by a vote of 8-1. It was rather. We had 8 times more people voting against the development than voted for it. The people of Wareham demonstrated that we're not a desperate nation, that we are willing to keep some of our open space open, and instead of having it, be filled with more concrete, more glass, and more metal. So a major win in Red Brook. Oh, I have a picture I meant to show you all here of people turning out. Now remember, this isn't a pandemic. All these people are masked. This is for a local election. And all these folks turned out to help ensure that we were able to keep that place protected. So, it's easy to talk about some of our on the ground work and to look at it through the lens of, well, what does TU do? Well, they improve fishing, or they make fishing better. It's kind of one of the buzzwords, the catchphrases we use around here. And it's true when you think about places like the driftless area, where we'll go in and we'll shock a stream before we do restoration. And we've done well over 100 miles of stream restoration in the driftless. And we'll find 100 to 200 fish per mile. And then we'll go back in a year after the restoration, and we'll find 1,000 to 2,000 fish per mile. There is an obvious and tangible benefit to fish and fishing from the work that we do. But it's just a small part of what we're really doing as an organization, because when you protect that headwater system, when you protect a place like Red Brook, what you're doing is you're minimizing, you're lessening the cost of water filtration for downstream communities. When you allow a river to reconnect to its floodplain, you're basically diminishing the energy of the flood, the next flood, whenever it comes, and you're protecting infrastructure and homes downstream, infrastructure like bridges and roads, by letting that energy dissipate out across the floodplain. And when we go out and we do large-scale watershed restoration, we're creating hundreds, thousands of family wage, high-paying jobs in rural communities all around the country. Basically, by protecting, reconnecting, and restoring river systems, what we're doing is we're helping to recover the natural resilience of these rivers and streams so that they're better able to withstand the effects of a changing climate. So what I want to do now is take a look at this is again the highlight reel of some of our accomplishments on the ground over the next year. And I will mention some of these and the fish response to some of these, but remember, there are multiple benefits, multiple social benefits to every one of these projects. My favorite project of the year may have to be Rattlesnake Dam. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let a little video play here in the background, and I'll talk over it because there's no sound to it. But we work with a series of partners to take out a dam that had bifurcated the city of Missoula from a wilderness area upstream. It's a truly remarkable project. Eventually, you're going to see these track hoes start working on the dam on the left. And you will probably ask yourself the same question I always ask myself when I see videos like this, because TU is now involved in multiple dam removals all over the country. And the question is simple. Why don't they use dynamite to blow these things up? It would be so much fun. But you'll see how quickly they take this dam out and how they put the bends back in a river that had otherwise been straightened and channelized. Let me read to you what Rob Roberts, the project coordinator, said about this. He said, Rattlesnake Creek is one of our prime West Slope cutthroat and bull trout spawning tributaries for the Clark Fork in this section. A lot of the sport fishing opportunity that you see in the Clark Fork and Lower Blackfoot comes from the spawning activity that happens in Rattlesnake Creek. Every fish in the river spawns up here. Okay, I was a little worried I wasn't going to be able to get out of there. Let's move over to Utah and talk about the Provo River. The Provo is probably one of the most popular rivers in the state of Utah. It has over 7,000 anglers per mile per day every year. It's a tremendously popular fishery, but in 2018, one of our volunteers realized that the water was about at half of its historic low. And we found out it was because of drought. And so we went to work with our partners at the Bonneville Environmental Foundation, who helped connect us to Facebook and Coca-Cola. And we came up with a really creative solution. we went to a power company and we bought water that otherwise would have been sent through the power turbines and got an agreement that we could keep it in the river for the benefit of fish. And this image shows you the results. The picture on the right is a healthy river that has the flows thanks to our friends at BEF and Coke and Facebook. And the one on the left is it's got way too little flow, probably not enough dissolved oxygen, really bad for fish, if not lethal for fish. And you know, climate change isn't going to get any better anytime soon. So it's really important that we're able to maintain these relationships in our communities with industries that might not always have a direct connection to conservation, and be opportunistic about finding opportunities to help them engage in our mission work. This is a classic acid mine drainage shot from the West Branch of the Susquehanna. In the 1970s, after several centuries of mining, many people in the state of Pennsylvania had essentially given up on the West Branch. There were too many creeks, too many tributaries that looked just like this, that had orange flow coming out from a draining adit. And these, by the way, are often filled with a toxic brew of zinc and cadmium, arsenic, lead. It's all bad stuff. And so TU and our many partners in the watershed began working over the last 20 years, really, to try to turn this around. And since 2009, I'm really pleased to report we've now recovered 26 miles of the West Branch of the Susquehanna. These were 26 miles of river that were essentially lifeless, that now have wild trout populations. Many of them actually have Class A, which is like a gold medal fishery in the state of Pennsylvania. So our success in the state makes evident the need to continue our advocacy to push Congress to reauthorize the abandoned mine land cleanup fund. It's before the Congress right now. We're feeling good about our chances there, and also to push for finally passage of Good Samaritan legislation that will make it easier for more nonprofits and more local communities to clean up abandoned mines all around the country. One of our newer projects is in the Lower Snake and in the Mid-Columbia Basin. This allows us to work on rivers like the John Day and the Umatilla and the Upper Grand Ronde. And what we're trying to do here is really cool. We're looking at these mid-elevation meadow systems and trying to recover the natural function of a meadow. So when you think about a healthy watershed should do three basic things. It should catch, and then it should store, and then it should slowly release water over time. And when you have a system that's unhealthy, what happens is the channel begins to, it literally begins to, the flow of the water will dig down into the channel, and it'll begin to straighten the river. You won't have these nice bends that you see in this picture here, and that will merely increase the velocity of the stream downstream and exacerbate the effects of flooding. And so what we're doing, and this happens to be a place called Sheep Creek. It's a tributary to the Upper Grand Ronde. But what we're doing is we're literally taking hand crews into the field. In this case, these were a group of veterans who were considering getting into conservation as a new career. And what they did is they loaded up these stream channels. It's not like this is something I would do. They do it with there's a method to their madness. But they basically put large wood back into the creek. And what that does is it forces the water table up and it pushes the water out across the banks of the river. So in the image on the right, you can see how it's created wetlands. You can see there's off-channel rearing and spawning habitat that's been created. And it's also going to allow the watershed to provide that sponge effect, which will be great for irrigators downstream. It'll provide late season flows for them. It'll provide late season flows for the fish, obviously. But this is the kind of thing that's good for fish, it's good for people, and it's ultimately good for communities. So I'm going to wax on a little bit here about brook trout because like your first kiss, everyone remembers their first brook trout. Mine was caught in Green Mountains. I had my fly line in the water and I was walking upstream to go to another pool. I didn't know my line was in the water, and at the end of the line was a tug, and there was my first brook trout. They're incredibly beautiful and often very forgiving fish. There also are stream sentinels. They're terrific indicators of water quality and of land health. And unfortunately, right now, they're in trouble. brook trout only persist today in about half or a little bit less than half of their historic habitat. And climate change is posing a huge challenge for us because we're getting these in places like New England, we're getting 100-year floods at almost decadal intervals, it seems. And then on the other side, we have other parts of New England that are actually in drought conditions. And so it's really important that we're able to reconnect these river systems and try to create strongholds for these brook trout so they're better able to withstand the effects of a changing climate. In West Virginia, we've been working with our friends at the Forest Service on projects like this replacing that. I almost don't even want to call that a culvert on the left. It looks like a dam with a pipe in the middle, but replacing that monstrosity with a nice bridge like this that allows a natural stream beneath it is obviously beneficial for the fish. We opened up a couple of miles of habitat upriver from here. And in many of these projects, by the way, not this one necessarily, we're beginning to catch 14, 15, 16-inch brook trout from these systems where we've done this restoration. And, equally important, we're taking this approach that here on the Monongahela National Forest in this case, and we're marching it down onto the adjacent private lands. Over the years, we've now worked with 400 farmers and private landowners, basically to extend the cold water influence of the Monongahela off the flanks of the forest down onto adjacent private lands. In New England, we've been busy adding woody cover to these streams. It has obvious benefits in terms of providing cover for trout, also provides a thermal refuge, keeps those rivers nice and cool. What happened historically was that in America, we built, along most of our rivers, we built roads. And then right after we built the roads, we bought the timber trucks in and we cut all the trees down along the creeks because it was the easiest timber to get. But so it's going to take a long time. We're basically trying to accelerate the healing process of nature by putting more and more of this wood back in these systems. And the response is amazing. In places where we've done these wood installations in the Maine and Vermont, we've seen tripling of the trout populations. And the really good news is we just secured a $1.8 million grant that's going to allow us to expand this to about 75 additional miles across the New England region. Good news for New England. And then my final brook trout story here is in North Carolina. This is a great story. Our volunteers this past year logged 2,200 hours, more than 2,200 hours. And what they were looking for were blockages to creeks, culverts that wouldn't pass fish, roads that were bisecting rivers and not allowing for fish to pass. And they identified over 275 barriers in some of the best brook trout country that we have in North Carolina, places like Wilson Creek and the Sky Island complex. And I'm really looking forward to coming back next year and being able to share with you some of the amazing results of that work. Moving over to the Blackfoot, not the fabled Blackfoot of Norman McLean fame, but the Blackfoot of Idaho fame. We've been working for 10 years with phosphate companies, believe it or not, and other conservation interests to recover these adfluvial populations of Yellowstone cutthroat trout. And adfluvial means that these fish, the reason they're so big is they actually grow up in lakes and then they move back to the tributaries to spawn. The problem 10 years ago was that the fish couldn't get back from the lakes to the creeks to spawn because of irrigation diversions. And when they could get back, the habitat was all bombed out. There were, banks were down cut by grazing. The cobbles in the stream that they needed to spawn were inundated with sediment. So it was really a disaster. In fact, 10 years ago, we went in and did a red count. And a red is just a salmon nest, basically, where salmon lay their eggs. And we found 20 reds in the upper headwaters of the Blackfoot system. And we went back and looked again this year, and there were 250 reds, an order of magnitude more reds. Goes to show you that this restoration work is working. And there's something that it strikes me I should say. The lesson of the Blackfoot is fairly simple, but it's not uncommon across the organization. Restoration is often a long-term venture, and it requires capital over many years. In the case of the Blackfoot, over a 10-year period. It's often slow, it's often painstaking. But these are incredibly resilient systems, and they're incredibly resilient creatures. And if we give them half a chance, they will come back. So just moving over to Wisconsin in the Peshtigo watershed, which is in the northeast part of the state, what we're doing there is we're basically trying to, again, create metapopulations or create connected populations of brook trout that can stay up in the cold water habitats when in the warmer months, but then they're able to migrate down to the larger water bodies, which may or may not be suitable for them in the summer. What you see here is in green are the already connected systems where you have tributaries that allow for fish to move back and forth between smaller river systems to bigger river systems. What's really cool though is the areas in red. These represent some of the more than 70 miles that we have reconnected in the Peshtigo system and now created a situation where fish can move through this connected system in response to a changing climate. So I mentioned our strategic plan earlier, and like the old Soviet Union, but hopefully to greater effect, every 5 years, Trout Unlimited embarks on developing a new strategic plan. And, this is a great process this year. Many of you were involved, for which I'm deeply appreciative of your time. But what I'm really most excited about this year is this notion of developing priority waters. And so it's a very straightforward concept. And we developed pilots already in New Hampshire and in Oregon. And the idea is to go out and talk to the chapter leaders, talk to our council leaders, talk to our partners in the state agencies and the federal agencies, talk to other conservation interests, land trusts, et cetera, and get a better understanding of where should we be applying our conservation frame. And obviously this is going to be strategically important and will help us to make better decisions where there's a higher return on investment. But I think the sneaky, smart piece of this is what it's also going to do. The process of asking these questions and bringing people together should hopefully make our agenda our partner's agenda. And it should make their agenda our agenda. And our hope is, our belief even is, that instead of leveraging tens of millions of dollars for trout and salmon conservation, we'll be able to leverage hundreds of millions of dollars. It may not all flow through our books, but it will go toward the work that we all think is most important. It's terribly exciting. And so what I imagine that'll mean in places like New Hampshire, we're going to end up wanting to, and in fact, what the pilots showed us is that we're going to want to really focus on the North Country and on the White Mountains and keeping those places intact for native brook trout. But we're also going to want to focus on how do we engage the 6 million people that use the White Mountain National Forest every year? They go up there to recreate or to camp. And maybe what we can do is we can work on some of these adjacent communities and on rivers that may or may not be on public land, like the Beebe River, and try to do what we've done in places like West Virginia and replace culverts like the ones you see on the left with bridges like the ones you see on the right to allow for connectivity and to allow for fish to move in that connected system and to extend the cold water influence of the White Mountain National Forest downstream to private lands. Moving over to Oregon, as you would imagine in Oregon, our pilot there highlighted the importance of rivers such as the Upper Klamath, the John Day, the Deschutes. I mentioned the Grand Ronde. And I want to talk about the Grand Ronde for just a minute, because it's a jumping off point to another issue that I think is really important. Before construction of the 4 lower Snake River dams, the Grand Ronde was a tremendous salmon and steelhead fishery. It was a destination fishery. It was also the ancestral fishing grounds of the Nez Perce. But it was just a dynamic and important fishery. And that has changed because of what you see in this graph. And these numbers, by the way, go through 2019. If you saw the salmon and steelhead numbers in Idaho today, it would break your heart. And I hope you'll consider tomorrow joining us at 10 o'clock. We're going to have Congressman Mike Simpson, who I'll mention in a moment, and Shannon Wheeler, the vice chair of the Nez Perce, on a panel to talk about our efforts to try to take out the 4 lower Snake River dams. Because the point is this: if we are not able to take out the 4 lower Snake River dams, salmon will be extinct within 20 years. 20 to 30 years. They may hang around for a while because these are incredibly resilient critters, but we need to take these dams out. And happily, Congressman Simpson has worked with Congress. He's a Republican from Idaho, and he's working with Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat from Oregon. And they've come up with a plan that's really interesting. And basically, it would remove the dams, but it would do so in a really thoughtful and careful way that ensures that there aren't winners and losers, that all of the socioeconomic interests that depend on the status quo, that depend on those dams, they will be made whole. It's a really thoughtful process. We're going to talk about it tomorrow at 10. And I do hope that some of you will be able to join. I know that's early for those of you out west, but that's the time that we could get with Chairman Wheeler and Congressman Simpson. One thing I don't want to forget to mention is the reason Idaho is so important to Pacific salmon and steelhead is this. Scientists project that by 2080, 65% of all of the remaining salmon habitat on the West Coast is going to be in Idaho because of their high elevation areas. There's going to be some thermal protection from climate change, and because of that wilderness quality habitat that they have all over the state. If we want to have a future with salmon in the West, it's vital that we're able to get them back up into Idaho. So there's almost a seductive temptation in a presentation like this to really geek out and talk about the science, or to talk about the fish and the fish response to the work that we do, because it's so phenomenal and it's actually inspiring, and it makes fishing a lot better. But to say that what TU is about making fishing better, or it's about improving fish numbers, it's like saying that those of us who are serious anglers, we fish simply to catch fish. And that may be the case when you start out as an angler, but some of my favorite times on the river are the hours that go by when I'm just in my head pensively casting a line, giving thanks for so many things, but one of them isn't catching fish that day, and that's okay. Now, make no mistake about it, conservation is at the core of everything that we do as an organization. I couldn't give this presentation if that wasn't the case. And many of us are deeply passionate about fishing and fly fishing in particular. But the real work of Trout Unlimited, the real work is building community, stream by stream, project by project, relationship by relationship. What TU does better than anyone else is we help to build community in an otherwise fractured world. That's what we do as an organization. Think about programs such as Trout in the Classroom. And I happen to be here at this Trout release. And the Cross River is right behind Lily's back here. And these kids were all, I think they were all kindergartners. And so when they all came tumbling off the bus and down to the river, which was frankly frightening, Lily organized everyone. Lily is the woman in the blue shirt with the flower in her ear. And she said, okay, how many of you have ever seen a free-flowing river? Or have not seen, I'm sorry, she asked it in the negative. How many of you have not seen a free-flowing river? And every single kid, and just about all the parents, they all raised their hand. None of them had ever been to a free-flowing river in a park setting like this. So, do I think that many, if any, of these kids or their parents are going to grow up to be anglers? I don't think so. Maybe some will. But I do know that they're not going to soon forget the lessons that Lily taught them about the life cycle of trout. And they're not going to soon forget the lessons that she taught them about the hydrologic cycle and how important clean water is. And then in 15 years, when someone suggests that they want to take away the protections of the Clean Water Act for small streams, they're going to make their voices heard because they remember what they learned here. Similarly, in the Rogue Basin in Michigan, we planted over 40,000 trees. That is a remarkable achievement. It's even more remarkable that we got 900 kids out last year. Now, I know there were a lot of parents who probably wanted their kids out of the house really bad last year, but to get 900 kids on the ground during COVID, planting trees is no mean feat. Even equally impressive, or even more impressive, is that we were working in 3 of the most diverse communities in the state of Michigan doing this work. Now, again, I'll ask the same question. How many of these kids are ever going to take up fly fishing? I don't know. But I know that they better appreciate the importance of well-vegetated and healthy streamside areas in terms of protecting their community and downstream communities from the effects of flooding. And when they're able to vote, they're going to remember that. They're going to remember the lessons that they've learned in events and places like this, and they're going to carry that with them for the rest of their lives, whether they're anglers or not. They're going to be better, what Aldo Leopold called better citizens of the land ethic. And so I want to just finish by talking about this remarkable community called Cuesta, New Mexico. So Cuesta is what we used to call, it's a typical resource-dependent community. And what I mean by that is there was a mine in the headwaters of this town. It was a molybdenum mine, and most of the people from this majority Hispanic community worked in the mine. And then, as often happens, the mine played out and unfortunately left, a bit of a toxic legacy in the river. But a remarkable thing happened on the way to cleaning up that river. The people of Cuesta realized that they wanted to remain resource dependent. But in this case, the resource that they wanted to remain dependent on was the river. And importantly for us, the little jewel of a Rio Grande cutthroat trout, one of our most resilient and toughest trout. These fish are able to persist in barely any flow, 1 CFS systems. These fish can still persist. They're rugged and they're tough and they're resilient, just like the people of Cuesta, New Mexico. So about a month ago, I was testifying at a hearing before the House Natural Resources Committee. And there was the woman who was chairing the committee, she was the acting chair, was named Congresswoman Teresa Lager Fernandez. And she told me that she was a 17th generation Northern New Mexican. Just swirl that one around in your glass for a second. 17 generations. And so she said, she interrupted me and she said, I want to read you what she said. She said, Mr. Wood, my son is interning for Trout Unlimited. It has been life-changing for him. TU has such a positive reputation in the rural parts of New Mexico. My constituents see you all as problem solvers who are trying to bring fish back, but also to make the lives of people who live in these communities better. Toner Mitchell, and he's one of our employees who works down there, is a shining example of someone who understands how to work with communities to get things done. If I could have a member of Congress say that to me once every 10 years, I would be a happy man. But it was just a tremendous tribute, not just to Toner, but to all of you and the whole way that we approach the work that we do. So I want to finish with I read an essay by a woman named Kay Collier McLaughlin not long ago. And she was recounting how a friend of hers who was he was a missionary in Guatemala. And he had told her how one of the things that he found most remarkable about his experience was there was a tower, a bell tower in the middle of town. And he would walk up this bell tower and just marvel at the fact that adorning the walls on the top of the bell tower were these amazing paintings and frescoes, these intricately detailed, beautiful pieces of art that no one could see but the pigeons and maybe the bats that occupied that bell tower. And it was just a truly remarkable story. And it, especially in this era of this whole, look at me, look at me, look at me world that we live in. It's just truly beautiful and in a quiet and sort of elegant way. And it reminded me of TU's work. It reminded me of so many of you. It's quiet, it's behind the scenes, it's typically unnoticed, it's complicated, and it's ultimately beautiful. And I want to close tonight with Kay Collier McLaughlin's final words, because I think they're absolutely perfect for you all. You are those artists climbing your own steep and narrow steps to create the intricate designs that illuminate life and persistence and hope. Thank you all very much for everything that you do. And Jeff, why don't we open it up for a couple of questions?
Sure, thanks, Chris. So the first question Fred was asking, if you could talk briefly about the process for choosing future priority waters for strategic focus, how that process is going to work.
Yeah, this is something I've talked about quite a lot over the past year, but I think it's going to be a hugely collaborative process. I mean, the mechanics are that we've identified one staff person per state. And in states that we don't have staff, we're working directly with the council. We're modeling, for example, we don't have staff in Ohio, but we're modeling an approach there with the council in Ohio right now. But basically, we have staff leads whose job it is to work with the science team to aggregate the science and bring it, and then begin a collaborative process with all those partners that I mentioned, starting with the council chairs and their volunteer leaders, and begin to map out what we think is most important to protect, to reconnect, to restore. You know, the beauty of our approach for the past 10 years, really, I think, has been that the whole model of protect, reconnect, restore has been terrific at focusing on what we do. And what we want to try to develop with this priority waters is to be able to better answer the question of where are we working, where should we be working, and why are we working there? And so that process, Jeff, will play out, over a period of the next probably 6 or so months, maybe a little longer in some areas, maybe a little faster in others. But again, the goal is to bring everyone together so there's no difference between the council's agenda and their chapter's agenda and the national organization's agenda. Oh, and the Forest Service agenda. Oh, and the Nature Conservancy agenda. And you can see that if we begin bringing enough people in, we can begin to operate at a scale we've never been able to do this.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Clark, up in Vermont, wanted to ask about TU's efforts to make a more diverse and inclusive organization. His point was, without a larger and more diverse membership, how can we thrive over time? So he wanted to understand a little bit more what we're doing on that front.
Yeah, I mean, that's Clark, that's one of you and I have talked about this in the past, but that's the primary impetus of our whole diversity initiative, is that if TU doesn't begin to look more like America, if we don't even begin to look more like the fly fishing demographic, we're going to become less relevant over time. I can get on a soapbox here and I don't want to, but just quickly, in the past 5 years, the average age of a TU member went from 58 to 62. And while we've been promoting diversity for a long, long time, about 94% of all of our members are male and about 97% are white. Now, if you looked at the fly fishing demographic, and I know we want to be broader than that, but we should be 30%, we should have 30% women in the organization and 30% people of color. And so, look, it's going to be a long road. It's going to be hard, but we've got to work at it. And we're starting at the top. I mean, we brought in the most diverse class, maybe one of the most skilled classes we've ever brought in on the board of trustees. We brought in 4 people of color last year. We brought in our first Native American this year on the board, a former lawyer from the Yurok tribe, assuming she gets voted in on Friday. But it's something we're taking really seriously at every level of the organization. And it's been challenging. We have something we call the Ripple Effect Project that it's kind of trite and corny, but it's like, a stone in a pond. We want the ripples to emanate across the pond. And it's been challenging to do that because we can't get out and be with one another in a way that we normally would. But, it looks like things are easing up a little bit with the pandemic. And I think we're going to begin to get together, be able to get together fairly soon. And, you'll hear more about the Ripple Effect Project when that happens.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And then the last question from Nathan was, where does Trout Unlimited anticipate the greatest environmental issues over the next few years?
Boy, that's a great question. There's 2 ways I'll answer that. Actually, you know what? I would have answered that in 2 ways, but I will. Climate change is obviously the primary threat to trout fisheries across their range. They're sitting on the knife's edge of climate change. And, look, the good news is it's not like we're scrambling to find a model to, how to approach that. Our whole protect, reconnect, restore, sustain model is basically a climate change adaptation model. What I would have said before the pandemic was apathy and disinterest is the other issue I worry about. In the span of a single generation, America has gone from 60% rural communities to 80% urban communities. And until recently, fewer and fewer people were hunting and fishing. And I think our challenge now is to take advantage of all that interest that people have in the great outdoors and in rivers and streams in particular, and to make sure we harness that and figure out how to guide people into a pathway that where they can get involved in, in conservation and in organizations like Trout Unlimited.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much. It's 9 o'clock, so you perfect on time in terms of timing. I want to thank everybody who joined us tonight. I know um, we have some interest in drawing the prizes. Before I do that, and before I let Chris close this out for the night, I did want to remind everyone, please do visit tu.org/Trout Week. We have a great lineup of events. Chris mentioned tomorrow's 10 a.m. talk on Soul of the Snake. That's a really powerful talk. I'll be joining Megan and some of the volunteers to talk about how to kill a giant. We'll talk about Bristol Bay. We'll talk about Red Brook, but we'll also talk about the tactics and the action that it takes at a local level to bring that kind of advocacy forward. And there's tons more. You'll also see on that calendar lots of places and ways that you can get involved with, get your hands dirty and your waders wet with local chapters and councils. Obviously, we'd like to be in a time when we could be doing even more together in person, and we know that time will come again. So please always stay tuned to tu.org/events. That's where that calendar will always live beyond Trout Week. So with that being said, what we did was, everyone who's in attendance tonight, I put you in a random number generator. And the first place winner of the TU Life membership and the Hardy Rod Reel outfit is Steve Miller from the Washington Council. Actually worked out well. He's a volunteer leader. He's the chair of the Washington Council. The second prize winner of the Sims featherweights is Karen Haley of Melrose, Massachusetts. And Cade Williamson of Tullahoma, Tennessee, won the Sage Reel. So I'll get those shipped out to everybody, and Steve will connect on the Life membership. If you're already a Life member, which I suspect you are, you can gift that to a family member or friend as well. So with that, I'll end my comments, but Chris, why don't you close us out, and we'll go from there.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And really, I just want to say thank you to all of you. I mean this when I say it. Every single day I go to work inspired, and because I get to interact with people like you. This has been a challenging 18 months. I'm one of these people who, although I test as an introvert, I draw a lot of energy and power, frankly, from being around all of you, because you're so inspirational to me. And so I just want to say thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for everything that you do for Trout Unlimited, and that hopefully you'll continue to do. And with any luck, I look forward to seeing many of you in the very near future. Take care, everybody.